Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Mr. Chairman, Professor Kamali, Professor Chandra, Professor YZ, thank you very much for inviting me here to talk about the history of Islam and Buddhism, history of relations. I'm an academic, so I'm going to give you hard facts and some of things which will be where you may agree with me and you may not agree with me. First, let me introduce myself more, because if somebody asks me, where are you from? I say, give me 2 minutes. I'm born in Tanzania. I'm not black. People ask me, why are you not black? Because you're from Tanzania. Why should I be? I said, my grandfather is from India. I was born in Tanzania, British citizen, educated in India and the United States, living in Thailand for 30 years, speak 6 languages. I speak English, I speak Swahili, which is an African language, Hindi, Urdu, Arabic, Thai, and Malay Sikit. I'm going to pick it up. All right. So I was globalized before globalization. I'm not the child of the Pepsi globalization, of the fall of the Berlin Wall, or 9/11. I am the child of the globalization where cultures, religions, and languages mix together. And that's why we lived very peacefully. While today, when we talk about globalization, we talk about conflicts. We work on the theory, which we all learn in social sciences in the universities, that religions are the sources of conflict. This is historically false and a philosophical mistake, because this is based in modern epistemology and ontology of violence. My former speakers have already laid the ground of what I'm going to continue further. So I'm going to talk about Islam and Buddhism. I'm trying to use this, the history of relations, past, present, and future. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Inna Allah malaikatu yusalluna ala nabi. Ya ayyuhallazina amanu sallu alayhi wa sallimu taslima. I dedicate this lecture of my presentation to Professor Ismail Al-Faruqi, my professor. I was his last student assistant. He played a very important role, and he started me on this journey of understanding religions, and especially Islam and Buddhism. I have a book in his honor, a feshrift called Islam and Knowledge, which was published in 2011, dedicated to Professor Ismail Al-Faruqi. Now, when we talk about Islam and Buddhism these days, normally people ask me the question, what about the Rohingya? It's just like when I give a lecture in the United States, I'll give my best lecture in the United States on Islam, and at the end of the lecture, I'll have only 2 questions in the US. What is jihad and what is the status of women in Islam? Same thing is happening when I talk about Buddhism. The Muslims ask me, what about Rohingya? I said, that is the last question I will talk to. You have this picture of Dalai Lama and the Muslims with the Tibetan Muslims here, and also he's praying at a dargah in Delhi. This is what I do. These are my students. There's an imam of the mosque Masjid Harun in Bangkok, and the other 2 are monks who are very senior monks. They were my students formerly at Mahidol University. So my presentation is made up of 4 parts. I'll try to cover it very quickly. I'll give you just a little bit about my methodology, the Quran and the Quran and other religions. I'll focus on Buddhism and history of Muslim-Buddhist relations, and a conclusion. So to begin with, my presentation is basically talking about that the history of Islam and Buddhist relations is longer. It is about 1,700 years, more than Islam's relations with other monotheistic religions. And Muslims have abandoned the study of Buddhism since the 15th century. Muslims scholars have become dependent on Orientalist sources to study not only Buddhism, but also Asian religions. And my very important finding by living in Southeast Asia for the last 30 years is that for 900 years of coexistence between Islam and Buddhism in Southeast Asia, today there is no one Muslim scholar of Buddhism and no one Buddhist scholar of Islam. I'm imported from Africa. So you have 900 years of problems. I can't solve that in my 30 years of life here. So that's why I'm calling for the study of Islam, of Muslims, to start studying Asian religions. Because we are living in the age of what I call Asian Islamophobia. Islamophobia, everybody is excited about Islamophobia in the West. But there's Islamophobia happening here, right? It is coming from the back door. And it is coming from our Asians. Today, there is a movement in Asia, or what I call Asian Islamophobia, is to deny the Asianity of Islam. There's no such word, Asianity. In India, Muslims are told you are foreigners. In Southeast Asia, today, they are told that Islam spread here by jihad and not by friendship and trade. This is what I call Asian Islamophobia. And this is a disease which is going to come, and we are in a very vulnerable situation, both the majority and the minority here. So there is a need to go and revisit our past and find out the way of how to go towards the future. I'm basically based in the phenomenology of religion. My approach is that, civilizational approach to religion. And for those who are going to listen to me, I'm not a perennialist. I'm a parallelist. And when I say parallelist, I take the scientific definition that religions are like parallel lines which never meet. They meet at a station, like a train. You come at a assembly point, you meet to each other on a journey, like here, today we are, and then we continue our journey to the next station. So I'm more of in that kind of a situation. Okay, Al-Biruni was the first phenomenologist. He studied in India. Al-Biruni went to India with Muhammad bin Ghazni, and he studied Sanskrit. He lived in the Hindu temples, and he wrote one of the best books as a Muslim on Hinduism. And in this book he says the Muslims may not like what he is saying about Buddhism, but he is saying about Hinduism, but he is saying how the Hindus understand their own religion, and that requires the learning of those languages. So for me, Professor Ismail Al-Faruqi was the last of the phenomenologists in the Muslim world. Today we need to develop or produce more phenomenologists. And I'm not going to go into more of his thought, but go further and talk basically about the approach which Faruqi had. He emphasized, he pleaded that we lay the ground for theoretical and methodological foundation for Islamic approach to the history of religions. He also talked about understanding pre-Hijra Islam. Pre-Hijra Islam. We all begin our studying of Islam from Hijra and never go beyond. Like here in Southeast Asia, just Indonesia, Malaysia, all this Southeast Asia is made up of Hinduism and Buddhism background. And today here in Southeast Asia, if Islam and Buddhism are the two largest religions. 42% of ASEAN is Muslim, and 40% of ASEAN is Buddhist. How much do we know of each other? We only think about Rohingya, but without understanding the background of where we are and the languages which we use. Just look at your language of Bahasa Indonesia, Bahasa Malaysia or Bahasa Indonesia. It's full of Sanskrit and Pali. Full of Sanskrit. But many of Muslims don't even know what words they are using, like bulan puasa and several other words which we use are all Sanskrit and Pali. But we have whitewashed. So we have whitewashed of the way of our background, and there are no places of cultural bridging between Asian religions and Islam. So I'm basically pleading for understanding Asian religions from the Quranic perspective. The problem lies here. The problem lies that the Muslims look at Asian religions from the eyes of pre-Islamic Arabia. We look at the Buddhists doing like this to the Buddha statue, and we think they are worshipping. Actually, they are not. You go and ask any Buddhist, because the Buddha himself said he is not a god. They are just paying homage to a teacher, just like we do. We pay homage or say salam to our teachers. So we have to come out of this baggage which we have, which I call pre-Islamic baggage in our minds, and come to understand other religions, Asian religions, which are Hinduism, Buddhism, Confucianism, and Shinto. Today's Muslims do not know enough about Buddhism. It is attributed, whenever I talk about Buddhism, people say, they are the Chinese. But the Buddha was not a Chinese. I'm writing above this ethnic identification. I stayed in Indonesia several times. And we have to come over this idea that Chinos are Buddhists. We have to. Buddha was a very wise teacher. And for me, as I'll go further and show you to you, that the Buddha and Prophet Muhammad are the two great liberators of humanity. They are not what as we understand them today. So the popular view is that Buddhism is a philosophy and not a religion. This is another disease which we have borrowed from the Orientalists. But a Buddhist always thinks about action and the result of the karma. So that is karma and rebirth is tied. Just like in Islam, إِلَّا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ. Believe in God and do good deed. That is the basic understanding which we share, of doing good together. Now, I'm not going to go into this. I'll go further and talk about that we live here. Here we are in Asia. And you can see how Buddhism spread from India into Pakistan, into Central Asia, into Iran, into Central Asia, and China and Korea, China, Japan, and coming down here into Malaysia and Indonesia and this part of the world. And it has left. We are living among the Buddhists, and we are living along with the Buddhists. So many of the words which we use, like Pakistan, Tajikistan, Kazakhstan, all these words, Satan, are Sanskrit, means place, a station. Afghanistan, Professor Kamali, all these are Sanskrit words, and we don't understand their meanings. So how does Quran look at other religions? I'm looking at Buddhism basically here, and the state of Islamic studies. The Quran mentions that we should engage in fastabiqul khairat, competing to do good, and not competing to say which religion is better, mine or yours. Fastabiqul khairat. And many of the time we talk about la ikraha fid din, we talk about li ta'arufu, but we never talk about competing to do good. Doing good is basically what religion is all about. And Islam emphasizes on it, and Buddhism also emphasizes on it. But since we have entered into the modern age, we have abandoned the study of Asian religions. Today, we call other religious peoples of other religions as kafir. We don't understand the meaning of what the word kafir means. I was once giving a lecture in Indonesia, and a professor of Buddhism, a lady, came up to me, and she said to me, "Sir, am I a kafir?" I said, "Who said to you?" She said, "All the Muslims tell me I am a kafir." So I asked her, "Are you Fir'aun?" She said, No. I believe in the ultimate truth." So I said, "You're not kafir." So I really call for the moratorium on the use of the word kafir. We have to stop using this language because they don't make any sense. Kafir is one who rebels, who rejects, and Fir'aun is an example. So we have to understand of the languages which we are using, the terms which we are using. Okay. Oh, sorry. Need to go. Okay. What are the main difference between Islam and Buddhism? Islam is a theistic religion, and Buddhism is a non-theistic religion. Non-theistic means where the Buddha doesn't, where God is important, but not the central point of view. The human being, goodness towards human being comes first before talking about God. Now we have to understand the Buddha was in India, and in India at that time there were millions of gods, and they were not helping to relieve the oppression of the caste system which was going on in India. The Brahmins were oppressing the other caste, and the Buddha is basically interested in liberating the Indians from the caste system. So again, when we look at Buddha and Prophet Muhammad, I find that the Quran talks about God having sent His prophets in many places and in different languages. And some of them are mentioned. I'm not able to see it very close here, a little bit far. And some are not mentioned. وَلَقَدْ أَرْسَلْنَا رَسُولًا مِنْ قَبْلِكَ. Allah says that we have sent the prophets before you. So the Muslims always say there are 124,000 prophets. But do you have a name list of that? We don't have a name list. So the Buddha could have been one of the prophets among those who came before Nabi Muhammad. Same on the other hand, The Quran also says, وَمَا أَرْسَلْنَا مِن رَسُولِ إِلَّا لِسَانِ قَوْمِهِ. They speak in their own language. So they are the teachers, they are the messengers of those who teach their own people about morality and ethics. So what are the comparabilities between the Buddha and Muhammad? For me, both of them are liberators. Their messages are of liberation. Liberation from what? For Nabi Muhammad, liberation through Tawheed and Adal, Tawheed and justice. And for the Buddha, through Sunyata, emptiness or detachment. Now, early Muslims, when they met the Buddhists in Sindh, which is a part of India now, they call them Ahl al-Kitab. I'm going to mention some things to you which you may not have heard before. There are Muslim scholars like Professor Muhammad Hamidullah and others who say that the Buddha is mentioned in the Quran symbolically. In Surah At-Tin, وَالتِّينِ وَالزَّيْتُونِ وَطُورِ سِينِينَ وَهَذَا الْبَلَدِ الْأَمِينَ. I'm taking this from Professor Hamidullah, Muhammad Hamidullah. Because Professor Hamidullah holds that since the Buddha attained nirvana under a fig tree, and since this tree does not figure in the life of any of the Quranic prophets, the mention of the fig in the Quran is a symbolic reference to the Buddha. This is Professor Hamidullah writing. And he's a great scholar of the Quran himself. And there are other scholars who, you see, because here there are four symbols: the fig, the olive, Mount Sinai, and the city. Olive is Jesus, Mount Sinai is Moses, the city or the land made safe is Nabi Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So the fig tree is a symbolic reference to the Buddha. Another scholar, an Egyptian scholar by the name of Hamid Abdul Qadir, has written a book on the Buddha al-Akbar, Hayatuhu wal Falsafatuhu. He even goes further and says Zulkifl mentioned in the Quran is a reference to Kapilavastu, where the Buddha is born. And if you read the verses about Zulkifl in the Quran, I'm not able to see very far from here. It says, Huwa ma'as sabirin. Ismail wal Idris wal Zulkifl huwa ma'as sabirin. They were among those who practice patience or tolerance. And the other verse also, it says, Zulkifl is min al akhirin. He is one of those who were among the best, or who tell us to do the best. Now, these are what some Muslim scholars are talking about, references to the Buddha in the Quran. Now, history of Islam and Buddhism. Muslim world has been engaging with the Asian religions for a long time, much before the Westerners came here. So if you look at our record is very, very early. We have met the Buddhists since the 7th century, as I said to you, in Sindh, and they were called as Ahl al-Kitab. Furthermore, Islam and Buddhism met together in Central Asia, and Muslim scholars wrote about Buddhism. At-Tabari wrote about Buddhism, and even for me, I think the Pesantren and the Pondoks here in Southeast Asia are modeled on the temple schools, which were here before Islam turned them into Pesantrens and the Pondoks and the madrasas. Al-Biruni writes about Hinduism, but when he wrote, Buddhism had already died in India. But you'll be surprised to know that Ash-Shahrastani, in his Kitab al-Milal wa Nihal, talks about the Buddha and explains what I just said to you before, explains that Buddha could be one of the prophets among those who have come before Nabi Muhammad. The other scholar is Rashiduddin Hamdani from Iran, who is a Persian statesman, and he wrote a book called Jami at-Tawarik. He wrote a detailed story of the Buddha, and I'm going to show you some illustrations, which you have not seen probably before. This is Hamdani's portrait, painting the enlightenment of the Buddha. Where is this? Here. This is the Buddha. This is not the Buddha which you see everywhere. You know, the Buddha statue which you see today are 500 years old after the Buddha died. And this is Hamdani's portrayal of the Buddha. And this is the Mara or Iblis. Before the night of the enlightenment, the Mara or the devil attacked the Buddha so that he would not be enlightened. Now, if you look at this portrait, at this painting, Very interesting. You can see how the Buddha is. He looks very Arab, right? He doesn't look the Buddha you know. And same with Mara. And you can see how the painting is. The Buddha is sitting steadfast. And the Mara or the Shaitan is kind of bending, he's attacking from every angle. Now this is a Muslim illustration of the Buddha's enlightenment. This is again Hamdani drawing the grove, the forest in which the Buddha was enlightened. I think I don't have much time. I'll just show you some few pictures. 2 minutes, okay. The other very important scholar who wrote about Buddhism is Hafiz Abru, and his book Majma' at-Tawarik. He also draws many paintings of the Buddha. I don't have much time. This is the Buddha after his death and his disciples mourning about him. Let me finish with two quotations. One is from Rumi. I'm not going to read the Persian, but Rumi is basically saying, on truth's path, wise is mad, insane is wise. Okay. In love's way, self and other are the same. Having drunk the wine, my love, of having been one with you, I find the way to Mecca and Budkhane. Budkhane is a monastery, to be the same. You know the word, even Imam Bukhari. You think Imam Bukhari was an Arab? No. He came from Bukhara. The word Bukhara means Vihara. Vihara means the city of temples, Buddhist temples. So you have to get over the idea that Imam Bukhari. So even his lineage shows that his forefathers were of a Buddhist background. And the last person I'm going to mention here is Iqbal. Oh, this slide is not clear. Iqbal wrote a whole poem on Nanak. But in that poem, this is in Javed-Nama. He praises the Buddha very, very much. It's in Urdu. It's a very, very nice poem. He says the Buddhas came with the message of truth, but the Hindus didn't understand it, and that is the tragedy. So I will stop here. I have much more to say. I can come back later on. Thank you very much.